On a recent Experience episode recapping Crockett's downfall, you guys mentioned the possibility of Bill Watts getting on TBS instead of Turner buying Jim Crockett Promotions. Jim said something like, and then we wouldn't be talking about the downfall of the wrestling business. And Mr. Co-host responded saying, Watts knew how to hit back against Vince. I was wondering if you guys had some examples of Watts hitting back, as well as your thoughts on ways he would have or could have competed with Vince on national TV.
Oh my God. Well, for one thing, Watts was under the assumption that he was going to be partners with Turner, because that was if the deal had come to fruition they were talking about. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, since you're a fucking savant, but the deal that had been proposed and potentially was going to happen had then Crockett not taken over the time slot and Turner got disinterested was that they would indeed be partners in a wrestling company that would be on his, not even station anymore, his network or his superstation. And so Watts pretty much would have felt that he was free to, and Turner wasn't shy. So if there were things like Vince blocking Crockett on pay-per-view before Crockett was partners with Turner, that wouldn't fucking happen. Turner's what got him on pay-per-view. That type of the clout that Turner had, that, you know, Watts was not afraid to hit back at outlaw promotions or people invading his territory, and he would have had somebody that could actually fucking fight back in terms of strength. That's, you know, pretty much what got Crockett on full clearance on pay-per-view, was being involved with Turner Home Entertainment for the Bash 88. Because they knew they were pretty much going to buy the thing at that point. Did I miss anything?
You got a lot of it. The story is that in early 85, Bill Watts and Ted Turner had an agreement in place for there to be a partnership. They knew each other for years. Bill Watts, of course, had been a top star and a booker during the Georgia Wrestling War. And unlike Ted Turner at this point in the 80s, in the 70s, although he was already a millionaire and he was flying high in Atlanta and having a good time every night, he was still around the studios. You hear from people who worked there who would see Ted Turner around the studios when they were filming wrestling.
Yeah, when I first got into business and would talk to guys who had you know, been in the business and been down there, you know, 10 years before or whatever it was, they would say, oh yeah, you know, you used to be able to see the guy, because that was, you know, he didn't have 1,600 businesses at that point.
That's right. So Watts had the relationship, or at least knew Ted Turner. And again, Watts also owned 10% of the Georgia office until late 82. And, you know, coincidentally enough, it's that sale of the stock to Ole Anderson which caused all the chaos with Jim Barnett being pushed out, because Jim Barnett was someone Ted Turner knew. So now you have Georgia Championship Wrestling, and really the people Ted Turner deals with aren't there. He's not going to deal with Ole Anderson. He knows Watts. And I'm sure Watts was on his best behavior with Ted Turner. And it would have been interesting. The big thing you hit on is the right one. Vince wouldn't have been able to prevent Ted Turner from having something on cable. The cable companies were much more interested in having a good relationship with Ted Turner than Vince McMahon. They needed to. He had CNN already. So that wouldn't have happened.
Well, and also, when you think about it, Watts could go to Ted Turner and say, remember, you know, because he was the booker during a lot of the fucking war period in Atlanta. He can say, I've written one of your top rated show before, however they would have said it in those days. I don't even know if he'd said written to Ted Turner. I don't know if he'd used that term, but I was the guy, right? And Turner knew that. But at the same time, it may show when Crockett took the time slot over and they had a good Southern wrestling program back on TBS, and people stopped complaining about the WWF and got their wrestling back. The problem was solved for Turner without him having to actually get in the wrestling business. So I'm just wondering if that turned him off to it, instead of doing the thing that he was going to do. Maybe he just he wasn't that committed. Who knows?
Well, remember too, he put Bill Watts on TV. There's all this chaos going on. Vince buys the Georgia stock in the summer of 84, and he now has TV on WOR, on USA Network, and on TBS. Ted Turner gives Ole Anderson that early morning spot for Championship Wrestling from Georgia because people wanted their Gordon Soley wrestling. They were pissed off.
Yeah.
And then Ted Turner makes a deal with Bill Watts, the first deal, to put Mid-South Wrestling on TBS, and it becomes the highest rated show on cable television. immediately. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I've always heard that that's one of the reasons they put the North American title on Brad Armstrong, was knowing they were going to be on TBS, and he was just coming off a couple of really hot runs on TBS.
Well, and as a matter of fact, that's how, when I was in Dallas, I was able to watch. It was Dallas, right? Yes, I was able to watch Mid-South Wrestling on cable. And that was another thing. I was like, motherfucker, as soon as we leave, they get on fucking TBS, because we had just got to Dallas a couple months beforehand or whatever. So, yeah.
And in terms of Watts hitting back, it's a few things. One is, no disrespect to Jim Crockett Promotions, because I'm a big fan of it, but I think Watts was even more directly opposite Vince. Like, there was no winking to the camera on Bill Watts' show.
No.
So it would have been interesting if he had the power of Turner with him, because it would have been completely the opposite of 1980s WWF, even more so than Jim Crockett Promotions. So it would have been a very interesting battle there. And Bill Watts would have hit back. Bill Watts would put on a free show opposite WWF coming into his town. Bill Watts would do exposés on his television show, so telling you how Titan Sports is fake. They use fake chairs. Here's our real clips of guys getting concussions and stitches all over the place on TV. He would show clips of guys who left there losing matches. JYD, Iron Sheik, all of these guys.
Well,
Bill Watts will put up a fight.
It would have been the equivalent of the difference in the UFC and wrestling, probably at that point, between the WWF and Watts's product. If he got that much clout behind him, had Turner's money behind him, had the ratings he was going to fucking have, he could attract pretty much any name that he would have wanted at that point. That didn't want to work for Vince, one or the other. They would have been the two, obviously, as it turned out. It was with Crockett in that place. But it would have been night and day fucking difference. But it also would have been different than Dusty's version, I think, because
that's right.
Dusty could be ha-ha sometimes, but it once again, he had such a strong framework with the super charismatic baby faces that may not be the best workers, and the incredible fucking workers also with charisma on the heel side that they revolved around. But Dusty was more ha-ha. Dusty definitely was more cowboy, even than Cowboy Bill Watts. Watts would have looked like maybe the fucking NCAA tournament finals telecast and some of Dusty's bunkhouse matches, but it would have been it would have been serious, incredible, and guys like Terry Gordy and Stan Hansen and Dr. Death, along with, once again, look at his track record. I'm not saying the Midnight Express, but it probably would have been at that point, be quite honest with you, if he had a national television program and national promotion, he would probably have asked the Midnight Express, Jim Cornette, because we were and the Freebirds, because we were his two top heel teams in history. But he would use guys that could work and put them in situations where everybody didn't have to be 300 pounds. That's what people forget. That he would, that he could get the most out of the talent. He could make people love the babyface the most or hate the heel the most. The strongest emotions were the ones that people got from Watts's product. So anyway, it would have been very, very interesting.
Well, here's the other interesting thing. Let's say it happened. Watts gets on TBS, Ted Turner's his partner. You would think that means now beyond the Mid-South territory and beyond Houston, which Watts has points in with Paul Bosch, he would now be able to go into the Omni. You would think that would be an easy transition now. You have Atlanta. And you got to think maybe something would have happened with Florida, because Eddie Graham dies just a few months before that. Watts has a strong connection to Florida. And Florida, I hate to say it had an aimless direction after Eddie Graham, but it obviously wasn't the same. It didn't have that leadership there. And
they wouldn't have sold it to Crockett if it was worth keeping.
Right.
At that point. So, yeah, and if it had been Watts instead of Crockett expanding from the Carolinas to Georgia, then it probably would have been to Florida as well, because they already have TV in the state, courtesy of TBS. So it would have been natural for them to, but Watts would not probably have bought the territory. I'm not saying he would have just gone in and run Eddie Graham's family out of business. But if they were failing, he would have figured out some way that didn't involve losing money on a deal to take over Florida. and probably have everybody working like the Curtises in Mississippi. It'd be the Grahams in Florida, but it'd be part of Mid-South Sports.
Here's the other thing. Watts has a better relationship with Vern than Jim Crockett Jr. Watts is already partners, even though it's on the last legs, with Fritz in several towns in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So in terms of relationships with the wrestling world, that was the whole thing. Pro Wrestling USA failed because there was no leader. No, everyone was battling for their own agenda. But if you had Watts and he had that cable spot and he has the good relationship with Vern, he has the, I don't know how much longer he could have worked with Fritz, but he would have been able to go into Georgia. It really is the big game changer of all time if that had happened right around the time of WrestleMania 1.
Oh, now you've got me depressed right off the crack of the bat here on the program today.